Hey, everyone. So yesterday, July 14th, the United States Treasury Department dropped one of the biggest sanctions actions of the year, one of the biggest sanctions actions since the start of the war. U.S. sanctions more than 50 individuals and entities and vessels tied to Iranian shipping. So we're going to talk about what this is about. Now, on the surface, it just looks like another list of Iranian sanctions we've all gotten used to seeing, and they, of course, they put out the press release from the Department of Treasury, and it gives this long list of people and institutions that are being sanctioned in this round. But I want you to know why this is actually different, why this really matters. What we're going to do is we're going to talk about what these sanctions actually are about, and it's an interesting story. And then in the latter part of the video, we're going to talk about the implications for what is happening right now in the war and how this fits into everything that we're seeing in these days. Okay, so these sanctions, one of the interesting things about it is that they are aimed at, primarily, they are aimed at one person. He's mentioned throughout, right in the top of the Treasury press release. It says, today the Department of Treasury's Office of Foreign Assets Control is intensifying efforts to disrupt and degrade the illicit shipping and sanctions evasion network of Mohammed Hussein Shamhani. Okay, this one guy, Mohammed Hussein Shamhani. We're going to learn all about this guy. I'm going to show you who he is and how his operation works. And I think you're going to see that this sanctions announcement is major. It's a window into how this war is being fought right now, connects to everything that's going on. Let's get into it. So the Treasury Office, the Treasury Department's Office of Foreign Assets Control announces its intensifying pressure campaign on the Shamhani network. 50 plus designations in one action: individuals, shell companies, vessels. The Secretary of Treasury, Scott Bessent, puts out a statement, and he says in the statement, here's the key line. I'm not going to read the whole statement. We're going to do this. We're going to save a little time here. The key line is quoted in this article. The Iranian regime survives on deception, and the Shamhani network is one of its most profitable engines. Treasury is shutting down the financial infrastructure that allows the regime to continue its threats to U.S. national security and global shipping. Okay? So what did he call it? One of its most profitable engines. It is the financial infrastructure of the regime, he's saying. Treasury shutting down the financial infrastructure that allows the regime to continue its threats. This is not the first time they've gone after this guy, Shamhani. They first sanctioned Shamhani back in July of last year, a year ago. They hit his network again in April of this year with some more sanctions. And now with yesterday's action, Treasury says that it has now sanctioned over 200 individuals, entities, and vessels connected to this one man's operation. 200. Okay, we're talking about a massive sanctions campaign against a single financial network that has been going on for over the course of a year. Now, there was a second piece of yesterday's announcement that gets lost in the noise, and even in some of the stories that I read about it, it didn't mention it. Secretary Bessent said that Treasury also froze $130 million sitting in digital wallets tied to Iran's central bank, crypto. So this isn't just tankers and shell companies anymore. It's a financial dragnet that now reaches into digital assets, which experts say Iran has been leaning on more and more since the war started, both to move regime money around sanctions. That's why they use it. But also as a lifeline for Iranians who don't have a functioning banking system. So the obvious question is, who's this Shamhani guy, and why does this one guy, this one oil trader, rate the kind of attention that he's getting from the United States Treasury? Now, before we get into Shamhani, let me just remind you about an event you do not want to miss this coming Monday, July 20th. At 1 p.m. Eastern Time, 8 p.m. in Israel, a webinar, Are We Headed for Regime Change? What to Expect from the Middle East? If you can't make that time, you should still register for this event, because if you register for the event, you will receive an email after the webinar with the full webinar that you can watch on your own time whenever you wish. But you'll only get that if you register. So Are we headed for regime change? What to expect from the Middle East? Our panelists are Brigadier General Amir Avivi of the Israel Defense and Security Forum, Brian Kennedy, president of the American Strategy Group and former president of the Claremont Institute, Dr. David Wormser, senior analyst from the Center for Security Policy, and Lieutenant Colonel Jonathan Conricus, senior fellow at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies, former IDF spokesman. This is an all-star panel. You do not want to miss this. So sign up by clicking on the link in the description of this video. That's the link. You'll see it down there to register. It's Israel365.com/regime, or you can scan this QR code. Don't worry, you can pause the video right now, take your phone out, scan the QR code, do whatever you got to do. Scan the QR code or click on the link in the description of this video. Webinar Monday, 1 p.m. Eastern, 8 p.m. in Israel. You do not want to miss this. Okay, so let's talk about this guy. Here he is on your screen, Mohammed Hossein Shamhani. Okay, so he is, Mohammed Hossein Shamhani, the guy that this whole sanctions regime is all about, is the son of a guy named Ali Shamhani. Now, Ali Shamhani, maybe you've heard of him if you're a real Iran nerd. He was one of the most powerful people in the Islamic regime, period. He was more powerful than like any of the people we're currently dealing with. He was more powerful. He ran the National Security Council, the Iran's Supreme National Security Council, for a decade until 2023. He was the second longest serving security chief in the history of the regime, right behind Hassan Rouhani, who then became president. This was a man who sat at the right hand of the supreme leader, Ali Khamenei. He was killed. This guy on your screen was killed on February 28th in the opening strikes of the war, the same strikes that killed Khamenei himself. His funeral happened back in March. They didn't wait until July 4th weekend to do it. So I'm going to come back to the father. Let's talk about the son now. Okay, so the son. His son is this guy, is Mohammed Shamhani, and he's the subject of all these sanctions. So while his father was running Iran's national security apparatus, the son was building what U.S. Treasury now describes as a multi-billion-dollar oil and shipping empire, one that, according to the Treasury Department, enriches a single family connected to the top of the regime, while ordinary Iranians, can barely eat. Now, how does this operation work? So this is the part that I really want you to understand, because it's a case study in how the whole Iranian sanctions evasion regime has operated for years. According to Treasury, the Shamhani network relies on a web of front companies, shipping firms, consulting firms, brokerage firms, and they're registered in places like the UAE, the Marshall Islands, Hong Kong, and other jurisdictions that look completely legitimate on paper. They have offices and websites and employees. Treasury says explicitly that these firms maintain a robust public presence to provide a veneer of legitimacy. So they actually have people in offices and working and functioning as companies and websites, all as part of looking like legitimate companies. And then there's the actual fleet, the tankers, the dozens of tankers that move Iranian and Russian oil products, and liquefied petroleum gas around the world. The ships get renamed and get their flags changed, and they get shuffled around. They get a different paint job between different shell company owners. The cargo, the oil, gets blended and mixed from ship to ship, Iranian crude being mixed with other petroleum products, specifically to disguise the origin before it's resold. And they move the ships around the world. They ship, they do this. They'll do this moving of the oil around in different ports or even at sea. There's a company that the U.S. Treasury names in the sanctions called the Milavus Group, that the European Commission says that it exists exactly for this purpose, to blend and rebrand Russian and Iranian crude oil so buyers can plausibly claim that they don't know where it came from. Okay, but then you also have to have the financial setup, because the money has to make it back to the regime. So that's where all the financiers come in. And some of these people are also being sanctioned here. There's a guy, Hossein Gorbani Zahed, and Mohammad Reza Rabar Madani. These are people that the U.S. Treasury describes as exchange house operators who give the network access to foreign currency and offshore shell companies so the profits can be laundered back to the family. So that's the model. You disguise the oil, you disguise the ship, you disguise the money, and you do it at scale. And Treasury says that this generates billions of dollars a year for the Iranian regime, and increasingly for Russia too, because the same fleet has been caught moving Russian oil around in violation of the price caps that were put on after the Ukraine invasion. But that's a side point. Okay, one more detail, because I think it's important to understand how this family operates. Back in March, an NGO, an investigative outlet, an American investigative outlet called the Organized Crime and Corruption Reporting Project, the OCCRP, reported that Mohammed Hossein Shamhani, our friend up on the screen, and his brother had built a $29 million property portfolio in Dubai. They used aliases and passports purchased from Caribbean Golden Passport programs. Caribbean Golden Passport programs are there's these Caribbean nations that offer a passport to someone, some rich person can buy a citizenship, can buy a passport from one of these Caribbean nations. The price is in the hundreds of thousands of dollars. Usually it ranges from like $200,000 to $400,000 to purchase a golden passport. So these guys used aliases and they get these fake citizenships, these golden passports, and they hide their identities and they buy real estate in Dubai with money that they're getting from this illicit oil trade. Okay, that's the family we're talking about here. So let's circle back to what happened yesterday. And I want to put this in the context of what's actually happening right now in the war, because I think the timing here is very important to what we're seeing. So a few weeks ago, back at the beginning of July, there's a news item that maybe you missed about a stranded tanker in the Strait of Hormuz. Okay, and it was a strange story. It was strange for a number of reasons. Like, look at this headline: Iran blames U.S. as ship runs aground in Hormuz, but tracking data tells a different story. I don't know if you remember this story. It was a perfect example of why you have to pay attention to what the Iranians say and what it signals. So here's what happened. Iranian state television aired an on-screen alert about a foreign container ship that had run aground in the Strait of Hormuz. And they said that it ran aground in the Strait of Hormuz because it chose a route other than the one designated under the Iranian, by the Iranians. And therefore it was shot at or threatened, or it was forced to run aground in the Strait of Hormuz. And they said that the IRGC has warned everyone that you should only use the routes that we approve of. So what they were doing was they were warning all the shipping companies, all the countries, that if you don't use our route, you're going to end up like this ship that was run aground in the Strait of Hormuz. But here's the problem, and that's what this headline's about. Iranian state TV blurred the ship's name. It never showed the registration number. Independent trackers like tankertrackers.com and this Armenian news outlet, they matched the paint scheme and the container colors on the ship, and they identified the ship as a ship called the Arista. Now, the Arista is not some random foreign vessel. The Arista is a ship that used to sail under the name Gauja, and it flew the flag of Panama until the U.S. Treasury last July, a year ago, sanctioned that ship. There are ships on the list of sanctioned entities, by the way, many ships. That's part of how they sanction the shadow fleets. They sanction the actual ships because they know which ones are owned by criminal operations. So this ship was sanctioned by the U.S. Treasury a year ago as part of the Shamhani smuggling network. So what happened? The ship got a new name. It got a paint job, and it now became the Arista. And instead of having a flag of Panama, it now had the flag of Comoros. This is a classic shadow fleet move to launder the ship's identity, the same way they're laundering oil, right? So marine tracking shows that this ship, the Arista, has actually been stuck in the same spot since mid-March. Okay, it didn't run aground a couple weeks ago. and it was traveling between two Iranian ports when it ran aground. So Iran puts out a segment threatening foreign ships to respect its authority over the strait, using as the example a vessel that is itself Iranian-controlled and already under U.S. sanctions. And they just tried to hide the name on camera. So the network that Treasury sanctioned yesterday is the same network behind that ship sitting in the Strait of Hormuz. Now, this is where we now have to connect what happened here to what happened yesterday with these sanctions on the Shamhani network to exactly where we are in what's going on in the war and what the Trump administration is doing. And I want to be very precise. I don't want to overstate the case. We all remember the MOU. Now Trump has said, oh, the ceasefire is over, but no one has ever officially said we are no longer bound by the MOU. The MOU is null and void. But point 7 of the 14-point memorandum calls on the United States to terminate. It says the United States will terminate all types of sanctions against the Islamic Republic of Iran in an agreed upon schedule as part of a final deal. It calls for terminating sanctions. Point 9 in the MOU says that pending the final deal, the United States of America will not impose any new sanctions and will not deploy additional forces in the region. Now, to be fair to the administration, if they wanted to claim that they're still following the MOU, which I don't think they do anymore, I don't think that yesterday's Shamhani sanctions technically violate point 7 or point 9, because those points actually are about sanctions relief for the Islamic Republic of Iran, the official state, the official state. And it's talking about UN resolutions, IAEA board resolutions, the primary and secondary U.S. sanctions regime on the regime itself. The Shamhani network is not the Iranian government. Okay, it's an illegal smuggling and money laundering operation run by a very well-connected family that exists to evade the sanctions regime. So Washington could say that these sanctions have nothing to do with the sanctions in the MOU if they wanted to. But I don't think this is all in a big parentheses. I don't think it matters anymore. I don't think we're following the MOU anymore. But that's really the point here, because I think this matters more than a technicality either way. Track with me here. This Shamhani network has been operating exactly the way it's always operated for years. Treasury says it's been a long time. They started sanctioning them a year ago. They didn't discover the Shamhani network yesterday. Right? They put sanctions on in July last year and in April of this year. They could have kept adding names to this list at any point over the last 12 months, including through the weeks that the MOU was supposedly in effect, because the MOU doesn't cover this. But they chose to do this right now. 50 new names, $130 million in frozen crypto yesterday, right when the United States is putting back the naval blockade and U.S. strikes are hitting Iran for, what is it, the 4th day running, heavy. That's what I want to focus on, the timing. Right, like point 4 of the memorandum of understanding said that there would be that the blockade would be gone within 30 days, and now the blockade is back. Right, point 9 said that there won't be any additional forces, but now they're pummeling them. So it's not additional forces, but it's, point 1 said that they would stop hostilities. So the MOU is obviously not in effect anymore. But these sanctions are different than strikes, because strikes is like a switch. You can turn them on and off. You can have strikes today, but not tomorrow. Sanctions is different. You're not lifting and putting back sanctions day by day. So here's my read on the situation. This is not the Americans using financial and military pressure to bring Iran back to the negotiating table to reinstate the MOU. That's what I think it's signaling here. Because if that was the goal, there'd be kind of a carrot and stick, and you'd expect them to threaten certain things, take actions like military strikes that are easily start and stop. But by putting sanctions on, of this type, by freezing the crypto accounts, they're escalating on the financial front. And to open up the Strait of Hormuz, if all it is strikes on missile installations and drone installations and demining and trying to get control of the Strait of Hormuz, they didn't have to do this. They're escalating on the financial front as the MOU is falling apart in other ways. So even without an official declaration that we consider the MOU null and void, that's what they're basically saying. So my take is this. Let me just be clear about what I'm saying. My take is that the MOU was a product of a particular geostrategic moment. When, Trump, either he wanted an off-ramp or he was giving Iran a chance at that moment or whatever, or he just wanted to bring down the cost of, the cost of oil, whatever he was doing in that moment, whatever his intent was in signing the MOU, that moment is over. And whatever brought us to this moment that we're in now, Washington is not trying to get back to the MOU. We're now back to maximum pressure, financial, military, and yesterday's sanctions aren't a lever to pull Iran back to the bargaining table for that MOU. That is my take. I think I'm repeating myself, but that's what I want. That's my point here. And that's why this network matters. The regime lost its security chief. Let's put this guy up. So we remember who we're talking about here. His father, the security chief, was killed on day one of the war. But the money machine that keeps the cash flowing to the regime and to its elite families has been running this whole time. That's the machine that this guy built. So if Washington, if the Americans want to really bring down the regime, then this is how to do it. They're choking off money. Now, will it work? I don't know. Let's see. Let's see what happens. Sanctions evasion networks are built to be resilient. Always more shell companies and shadow fleets. We'll see. But what yesterday tells you is that Washington is ramping up both military pressure and financial pressure right now. It's running them simultaneously. And both sets of actions are moving us further away from the MOU, not closer to it. That's my point here. All right, that's the Shamhani story. And that's why yesterday's sanctions matter. Thanks for watching. Keep sharing, keep subscribing. Make sure that you are subscribed, that you are registered for the webinar coming up on Monday. Link in the description of this video, or you can go back and get the QR code. And I'm gonna try to keep bringing you this information as best I can. Thanks for watching, and God bless.